Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Movies with G Rose. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode all about the Conjuring universe. Me and Jimbo sat down and talked about that. And after the podcast was recorded, we both went and saw The Conjuring 3, and we talk about that a little bit in here, so stay tuned for that. As you can see, I'm in a brand new home, a new apartment. If you watch the podcast or watch me on twitch.tv/withgrose, you'll be seeing this room a lot more. I stream a lot more often than I do these podcasts because quite frankly, it's easier, but go ahead, check me out there. I also made a TikTok, tried that out, posted a TikTok of just a snippet from the podcast, and it got like 1,000 views in one day. So I'm probably going to keep doing that. Just hopefully some more people come over from there. If you're listening on a podcast app, check out the YouTube video. I do video calls with my guests now, and might be a little bit more interesting than just the audio. But conversely, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're thinking, man, I wish I had the audio version for a car ride or for work or something, you can find the episode anywhere. Feel free to drop a like or rate it 5 stars or whatever. This week, we're going to be talking about Tarantino. Me and Jimmy sat down again and we talk about all of the Tarantino films, and we got about halfway through his filmography before we realized that this is probably going to be a two-parter. So this is part 1. Part 2 will be the next episode. Just like I said, we there's a lot to talk about here. There's a reason that Tarantino is, one of the biggest directors ever, period. Especially of our generation. But yeah, if you like Tarantino, I hope you enjoy this podcast. Little disclaimer, there was something wrong with my headset for this episode. It was either the USB port or the Bluetooth on my PC, but something interfered with the mic. So there's some popping, crackling noises. I do apologize for that. I tried my best to fix it in post, but I could only do so much. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy the episode, and I hope you come on back for part 2. I'll see you after. What's up, dude? Welcome back to another episode of Movies with G-Rose.
What's up, G-Rose? How's it going?
It's going all right. I know today we're talking about Tarantino, but the last time we talked about the Conjuring universe, and since then we both saw the new one. And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I know that you generally liked it.
I know you generally didn't.
Yeah, I mean, we can leave it at that if you want. I thought it was okay, but
I liked it. The scares weren't amazing, but I thought the story was pretty good. It was a little anticlimactic for the trilogy, but I think it was a decent movie overall. I enjoyed watching it, and I'll watch it again one day. Come October.
Okay, yeah. I think the scares were the worst part of it as well, so that's actually not like... It's a weird criticism for a horror movie.
I liked that they went in kind of a new direction. Like, other movies were like pretty traditional, haunted house movies, right? I think we can agree on that. They were pretty traditional. But the fact that this one went in more of a detective movie kind of a route,
yeah,
I thought that was kind of cool. I thought that was kind of a unique little twist. I can't really think of a lot of horror movies that have done that, so I thought that was kind of cool.
For sure.
I think it worked pretty well.
It was decent. So speaking of Tarantino, I wanted to kind of start by asking you, do you remember your first Tarantino experience?
I actually do.
Okay.
And
Let me
it's
hear
very
it.
specific. So, it was the night before I got my wisdom teeth out, okay?
Okay.
It was probably 8 or 9 p.m. and I couldn't drink water at that point because, you can't, when you're going into surgery, you can't eat or drink for a certain amount of time before then, right?
Right.
So No, I'm already feeling. Maybe I'm just in my head a little bit, but I'm already feeling like, oh, I'm thirsty. Oh man, I wish I could drink some water. Um, and my dad suggests that we watch Inglorious Bastards. So it's him, me, and my brother. And this is the first time I'd ever seen a Tarantino movie that I can remember. And so I must have been 18, I think. So
Okay.
like 5 years ago, I want to say. Um, and so we put on Inglorious Bastards, and I'm watching it, and the entire movie up until a certain point, and I think you know which point, up until a certain point, I thought this was like historical. Like I thought it was historical. Like I thought this was a real like, Jewish battalion in World War II. I was like, oh, this is like set in history. Like this is something that actually happened. And I was like, oh, maybe some things were dramatized, but like I thought this was a real thing up until the point where, they kill Hitler
Yeah.
by like burning him alive in a theater or
Bit of
whatever
a
they did.
bit of a
Or,
giveaway.
yeah. And then I was like, wait a second, that's not what happens. So, but I loved it. I was like, that's really cool.
But you liked the movie.
Yeah, I got my yeah. Oh yeah, loved it. Next day I got my wisdom teeth out. I didn't end up actually going under. That's a story for another time.
Okay.
Stayed awake the whole time, which I think is the most Tarantino way to do it.
Yeah, you definitely did it in his honor.
Yeah. So what's your first Tarantino experience?
Well, see, I don't remember if this was specifically the first time I saw a Tarantino movie, but I definitely have a very vivid memory of one specific night where I we were both in a fraternity in college, and I remember one night going over there and a bunch of guys were crowded in a room, just like drinking and stuff, and they decided to have a Tarantino night where they were going to
Uh-huh.
watch like multiple Tarantino movies. And the night is honestly a bit of a blur, but I remember watching Kill Bill 1, Pulp
Mhm.
Fiction, maybe Kill Bill 2. We ran through a few different movies, and again, I don't remember if that was the first time. I want to say that was the first time I saw Kill Bill, but maybe not Pulp Fiction. But regardless, that's kind of like my first memory of like Tarantino, really. And I enjoyed the movies a lot. It was probably the best kind of environment, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but watching Tarantino with a group full of guys while you are half drunk is I think that's kind of the target demographic right there. So I had a ton of fun. And since then I've had mostly positive but mixed opinions on his films. And yeah, I guess we can go from there. I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit of his like history and stuff before we dive into the movies, because Tarantino, as much of a meme as he kind of is, he is seen as being like one of like the biggest directors of our generation. Whether or not you
Yeah.
love all of his films, he's definitely like he's an auteur, you know what I mean? He writes and
Yeah.
directs pretty much all of his films. And yeah, so and he's just like he's one of those directors where he clearly wants a very specific thing out of his films, and he works very hard to achieve that specific style and feel.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, he began his independent filmmaker career in '92 with Reservoir Dogs, um, and he actually partly funded that from his screenplay True Romance, which I've never seen, but I think that it's like a noir film. I don't know if you've heard of it. I've heard it's
Yeah, I've
pretty
heard of it.
good.
I have not seen it.
So he like wrote that screenplay, he got some cash off of it, and then he made his first like independent film, which was Reservoir Dogs. And then his second film was Pulp Fiction in '94, which obviously Pulp Fiction was the one that like propelled him into success. Like it won numerous awards. Um, it won Academy Award for Best Screenplay. And then he wrote the screenplay for From Dusk Till Dawn, which I haven't seen. I don't he didn't direct it, I don't believe. He just did the screenplay for it.
Oh, that
And
was Robert Rodriguez
I think
who
he starred
directed
in
it.
it too, right?
Starred in it as well, yeah.
Okay.
Oh
Uh
man, I wish you'd seen that because I've got a lot to say.
yeah, okay. And then he went on to do Kill Bill Volume 1. He did Inglorious Bastards, Django, Hateful Eight, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And throughout those, he had um, some interesting drama, I guess you could say. There's a lot of history around Tarantino that some people may or may not know. What's the word I'm looking for? Not drama, like scandal, I guess.
Yeah, you could say that, I guess.
So one of the biggest um, scandals that he faced was with Uma Thurman, who starred in Kill Bill. And there was this big incident in Kill Bill Volume 1 where instead of having a stunt driver drive a car, Tarantino insisted that Uma Thurman drove the car herself, and she pushed back on it again and again. She really, really didn't want to do it. When you watch the movie, and the shot is in the movie, like it's just a shot of the back of her head, like she clearly didn't need to be in it. And sure enough, she like crashes into a tree as part of the scene, and she ended up with like long-term injuries because of it. And so like that was
Wow.
a big scandal where like Uma Thurman refused to work with him. They had a huge falling out, and to this day like she hates his guts. So that was a pretty big issue. There's also videos of like people coming up to Tarantino or like paparazzi coming up to him, and he's just kind of like an asshole, and he's like, I'll whip your ass up and down the street, and he's like acting like way tougher than he is. And
Right.
it's these little it's these little stories that you hear that kind of add to, I think, the big picture of like who Tarantino really is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, Tarantino himself, like as a person, he's this awkward little weirdo, this
Nerd.
awkward little creepy weirdo,
Yeah.
like
He,
this troll
yeah.
person.
I mean,
Um,
dude, he's obsessed with putting feet in his films. Like
yeah,
basically every Tarantino movie has bare women feet in the focus of the
every single
frame.
time.
Like
Yeah.
it's not just in the scene, it's like there's shots in every movie where it's like the focus of that shot is
Yep.
feet. And
I
it's just one of those things that people accept.
I feel like it's progressively throughout his career, it's gotten more and more blatant.
Yeah.
Like it started off kind of subtle, and then every single movie, the foot shots have just gotten
Yeah.
more and more gratuitous
Yeah.
to the point where he's not even hiding it anymore.
Yeah,
He
no.
knows it's public knowledge,
Yeah, no.
and now he's just going like, yeah, here's a woman's feet in the
Oh yeah.
camera.
In his last
I wonder
film.
what the I wonder what the screenplay says. I wonder what the script says. You know, it's like yeah, oh, who's the hippie girl from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? It's like, yeah, you got to put your feet on the dashboard like right in front of the camera. It's like you should have expected it, you know, it's my
Yeah.
movie. Like it's in your contract.
Yeah.
Margot Robbie too. It's like,
Well,
you know,
like any
both of those characters.
like any like the other aspects of any filmmaker, including Tarantino, you know, he becomes more and more engulfed in his style and what he wants to do as the films go on. And that's especially true for like successful artists, time and time again
Yeah.
he's putting out these bangers that people love. And so not only does the studio give him more leeway, but he is just more and more convinced that everything he wants to do is what people want to see. And you
Yeah.
can see that in his films. As his films progress, they become more and more down the Tarantino rabbit hole, for better
Yeah.
or for worse. But I do think it's important for us to take this time to acknowledge who he is as a person. You know, we're pointing out some weird aspects to him, but besides that, I do think it is admirable that he clearly has a very strong love for film, and his movies are constantly paying homage to early American cinema and
Yeah.
Japanese cinema and Italian cinema. And he's constantly, flexing his knowledge of film in a way that is enjoyable to watch. So with that being said, is there anything else you want to say about Tarantino the person before we talk about the films?
Gotta say, he feels like he's trying really hard. I'm trying to find a different way to phrase this, but there's no other way to phrase it. He's trying really hard to earn his N-word pass, right?
Dude,
Like he
dude, we'll
really wants. You know
we'll
what I'm
talk
saying?
about we'll talk about it more, but we'll talk about it soon. But I have a lot to say about that, um, because we'll get to it. But Natalie hasn't seen a lot of Tarantino films, and recently I showed her, like a couple years ago, I showed
Fiction.
her Django Unchained.
Oh,
Um,
yep, yep.
and then like a few weeks ago, I showed her Pulp Fiction. And we also sat down to watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but we turned it off an hour. We watched 2 out of 3 hours because she couldn't get through
Wow,
it. Um,
wow.
so so that's her experience, but we'll get to that, because that's kind of when you brought up Tarantino. The reason I said, yeah, let's do it for the podcast, is because I kind of have been thinking about him recently. So um,
Yeah, perfect.
I was thinking we could go through it on release order, um, because I think it's interesting. So
Yeah,
that would
I think
start
that's a
us
good way to do it.
with Reservoir Dogs. Do you remember the last time you've seen it?
I don't remember the last time I've seen it, but I know the first time I saw it, I watched it with my brother. I'm pretty sure it was like late at night. It was in my room, and it was on TV
Okay.
actually. And I think it's a great movie. Like in terms of debut films for directors, and I believe it had a pretty low budget as well. I would say it's fantastic given what he had. Um, he wrote the script, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, no, it was his first. He
right?
didn't he wrote and directed it.
Yeah. Very cool movie, very intense. It sets the style. Like you can see what he's getting at there, and then it gets more and more developed in pretty much every one of his movies. Um, it's kind of quintessential Tarantino. It's like exactly what you think of when you think Tarantino. It's a bunch of dudes, criminals in, slick uh suits, um
With
who are like
with
arguing
cool
with each
code
other.
names.
Yep, with cool code names, arguing with each other uh under very intense, situations.
Yeah.
And that's kind of Tarantino in a nutshell right there, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So many of his other movies are the exact same kind of thing, just different styles, different setups, what have you.
I would say this is one of my favorites that he's done. Um, it like you said, it really is the perfect like directorial debut, because it really shows you exactly what you need to know from this guy.
Mm.
It's violent, it's funny, it's dark, um, it's mostly dudes talking to each other and arguing, and it sets up it sets up a really important part of Tarantino, which is that most of Tarantino's films are structured like a stage play.
Yeah.
They take place in only a small handful of locations. Most of the time, you're spending bulks of the movie in these small, intimate spaces where people are just talking to each other. But it's a very, very specific kind of dialogue. It's realistic dialogue. It's dialogue that when you listen to it, it sounds like a genuine conversation, but at the same time, it's heightened. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's this funnier, quicker version of real dialogue. And it's nearly impossible to write dialogue like that. And I think that's why Tarantino is where he is today, is because for whatever reason he's able to ride that line between real dialogue and like this heightened sense of I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
I know exactly what you're talking about. He captures a style that no one else can quite imitate. You can tell if it is or isn't a Tarantino movie based on things like the dialogue, based on things like the pacing as well, right? And this is a good example of Tarantino's unique kind of form of pacing, right? That he meanders a little bit on certain scenes, certain conversations, um, things that like don't even seem to pertain to the plot at first, or even things that don't pertain to the plot at all, no matter how many times you watch it. And yet, that's what helps build this world, right? I mean, the one of the famous scenes in the movie is at the beginning. I think it was the beginning where they're all sitting at this diner. They're all talking about whether or not you should
It's the
tip.
opening scene of the movie.
Yeah, I think yeah. So it's the first scene of the movie, and they're all talking about like tipping and like Mr. Pink. I think it's Steve Buscemi. He's like, yeah, I don't think you should tip, and he's like, I
They
remember
have
this
this whole
the
argument
line.
about it, and the older guy is like, what the fuck are you
Yeah,
talking about? Everyone else at the table is like, you're
right,
crazy. And it's like this interesting
right.
little tone setter.
Yeah, absolutely, and it characterizes them. Uh,
Well, I think that's just it, is that even if Tarantino's not afraid to put scenes in a film that, even if they have nothing to do with the plot or even anything to do with like specific elements of the movie, they he'll put a scene or a piece of dialogue in that's strictly there to set tone and to build character. Like that's
yep,
the only reason it's there. And a lot of those elements are usually those elements, along with other aspects of his films, are kind of what shoehorn. I mean, let's just be honest, Tarantino like makes movies for dudes. I mean, am I
yep.
crazy for saying that? You know what I mean? Like he
Not
makes
crazy. I think you're right on point for saying that. Honestly,
like and I don't mean men or guys. I mean like he makes movies for dudes. You know what I mean? And so a lot of times when he throws these little pieces of dialogue and these little scenes in where people are just kind of bitching at each other. They're very like relatable because they kind of tune into that like weird. I don't know. I think it's very reliable to a lot of guys who just talk about random crap to their friends that doesn't matter in any way, but
yep.
like it matters to you in some weird internal sense because it's like defining your character to this other person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's exactly what Tarantino's doing in these movies. The last time, it's funny that you say that because the last time I tried to watch a Tarantino movie, it was with Sebastian and Shannon,
Okay.
and one of the things she said was, "Oh, this is just appealing to the male fantasy." And then Sebastian was like, "Yeah, that's why we watch it. The fuck, like
Yeah.
that's exactly what it is, you
Yeah.
know." And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that, you know.
Yeah. No, I would
I
agree.
don't think
And
it's I don't think it's toxic in any way, I just think it's, you know, dudes hanging out. Like some scenes are just dudes hanging out talking about weird random stuff that has nothing to do with anything that's going on. But
and
that's
that's
just a unique way of establishing characters that you don't see in almost any other movies. Like I feel like I never see that. Just characters talking about completely unrelated stuff.
Well, okay, here's the thing is comedies and action comedies will try to do that all the time, but they're not very well written. Or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They when they do try to do it, they're always doing it for a laugh. And to some extent Tarantino is as well, but he's not he's not telling jokes all of the time. You know what I mean? Like when you see these scenes in like let's say Pulp Fiction or something, like where John Travolta is just talking to what's Marcellus Wallace's wife's name in that movie? Is that Uma Thurman?
Uma
It
Thurman.
is
I don't
Uma.
know what
You're
her
right.
name was.
Yeah, so when John Travolta and Uma Thurman, like there's plenty of scenes where they're just kind of like shooting the shit with each other, and it's not
Yeah.
outright funny, but it's well written enough to still be captivating because it still feels like a real conversation. And because of that,
Yeah.
when they do arrive at a joke, it's usually better because it's not
Hmm.
surrounded by fake movie dialogue. And so in other comedies and action comedies, they will have these moments where they try to build character with irrelevant dialogue, but it's painfully obvious what they're doing. And so it feels like a completely
Yeah.
different thing when Tarantino does it because for whatever reason he's really good at putting that onto paper, that random like
Mhm.
spur of the moment male fantasy, whatever and like you said, it's not necessarily toxic either because when he does when he does portray women, as rare as it is, when he does it in the right way, and I think that's kind of why he has survived so long without offending mass swaths of people, is because when he does have a woman on screen, they are usually a very strong character. You know what I mean? They're not this
Yeah.
damsel in distress or this like throwaway person. Like usually they hold a very special specific place in the story when they do appear. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that, there is I guess there is one more scene we could talk about in Reservoir Dogs, which is uh, perhaps the most infamous scene in the movie with that Steelers Wheel song, "Stuck in the Middle with You."
Yeah.
Um, that scene is absolutely crazy and horrifying
Yeah.
and amazing,
Yeah.
and I love it. I can't hear that song without thinking of that scene. I
And
mean,
I think that scene, along with a few others, are indicative of the quality of direction that was to come from Tarantino, because we've been
yeah,
going on and on about his writing, which is spectacular, but it's important to remember that he is also a spectacular director. You know what I mean? The
yeah,
shots that he gets in that scene that you're referencing are really cool. I think there's a after he cuts that guy's ear off, the camera like pans to a
uh,
phrase on the wall that says like "Watch your head," that you would see in
yeah,
any factory or something. And that's obviously a more like kind of a kind of a silly cut, but
right.
it's it's these little pieces that go to show that Tarantino has a lot of talent behind the camera as well. And later on, I think he really dives into that even more so. Whereas Reservoir Dogs is more focused on like the character development, the writing, the plot. You're not, most of the movie's just shot like like a stage play. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's also worth saying, like, it feels like an action movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, am I crazy for saying it feels like an action movie, but there's no action scenes that I can really think
There
of, you
there's
know?
there's only there's like one or two big action scenes, and they're later on in the film. I really wouldn't say it feels like an action movie. It has an action. It's I mean it's like the part of an action movie that you don't really see much of, or there'll be like one
Yeah.
scene in a movie where everyone's like, "What the hell happened?" And that's like one scene in the movie. But in
Right.
Reservoir Dogs, like that's the movie. You know what I mean? So,
Right. Right.
um, so it's set within an action movie, but it's not the action part of the movie. So I think that's good. I think we can move on. I never saw True Romance, and he only wrote it. You didn't see it either, so I guess we can skip
I
it.
haven't seen it either, so we could skip that.
The next one was Pulp Fiction, which was obviously a massive success. To this day, it's probably like it's like the cliche like guy in film 101, ask him what his
Yep.
favorite movie is and he's probably going to say Pulp Fiction. And I just want to get out ahead of this and say I think Pulp Fiction is overrated. um that being said, I would still give it like a soft 8 out of 10. Maybe, like, I'd say it fits right around there. I do think it is a great movie, but rewatching it, it's definitely not my favorite Tarantino film. There's several others I would put above it.
And I would agree it's not my favorite Tarantino movie. And as you said, like this is the college freshman, part or dorm room poster,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh it's the it's the I love film movie,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Uh the performative I love film movie where you got to tell everyone that you love movies and this is the movie.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's a great movie. It's
I do
not my
too.
favorite Tarantino movie. Um, I really love this. Introduces kind of a new, um, sort of a new element to Tarantino movies that ends up becoming kind of a mainstay, which is he's not chained to the typical movie format in the sense of like, oh, we've got to tell the events in order because Pulp Fiction blatantly does not do that. It tells the events completely out of order. It goes from plot line to plot line. It's like, okay, what are we talking about now? Oh, it's a drug overdose at Marcellus Wallace's house, and like that's the plot right now. And all of that is just to characterize this criminal who is then going to be killed by what I think is the main character, Bruce Willis, later. Um,
I have
Goes
something to
back to
say
what you
about
were.
that though. Like,
Yeah.
I it bothers me that everyone brags about how Pulp Fiction has a non-linear storyline. Rewatching Pulp Fiction, dude, 99% of the movie is told in a normal linear storyline. 99% of the movie. The movie, it starts with, there's the whole diner scene, which obviously takes place, that the opening shot is the two random people arguing with each other at the diner, and they stand up and they start robbing the place, and then it goes into the real movie. Okay, so ignoring that opening scene, the movie 99% of the time just follows, like, it's like Samuel Jackson and John Travolta like go to that apartment building. They do their whole amazing scene with that guy. Then we switch to Bruce Willis and he does his little deal with Marcellus Wallace, and then it switches back to the two dude. Like, really, the movie doesn't go out of order until the third act. And in the third act, then it starts telling stuff in like different orders, which is like kind of interesting. But the reason that most people are able to like get into Pulp Fiction is because, like, I would say a good 70% of the film, the first 70%, are told in a linear order. They just kind of jump to a couple different characters, and then at the end of it, they tell you a story that happened earlier on. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're not I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I'd have to rewatch it. It's been a while since I've seen it. But I still think that's a unique way to tell a story. And the way it ends, the conclusion of the film is with a character who goes through more stuff earlier in the film. I don't know. I think that's kind of cool. It ends on a what's the line at the end? Isn't there a famous line from Samuel L. Jackson? Am I
Well, yeah. Okay, so I just saw this movie. He has his whole spiel that he tells to people before he kills them. It's the biblical verse about
Yeah.
the Lord and the shepherd and stuff. And at the very end of the movie, they tell this story. So what happens is they go over to rob that one that to kill that dude that wronged Marcellus Wallace at the beginning of the film. And after they kill that guy, some dude jumps out of the bathroom and unloads their gun on the two guys, and every bullet misses them. And so they kill that guy, and then Samuel Jackson has an epiphany, and he says that was a miracle. That's crazy. So then they grab the one guy that they didn't kill, Marvin. They get in the car, they start driving, and John Travolta accidentally kills Marvin. So then they go over to Quentin Tarantino's house. The wolf helps him clean up the car, and then they go to the diner where they run into the couple that's robbing the diner. And because Samuel Jackson just had this awakening, he sits down with the robber, the guy robbing the diner, and they have this whole conversation about how Samuel Jackson wants to be a better person and how he's been reinterpreted. I have chills talking about it, how he's reinterpreting that scripture that he's always said to people about how, maybe I don't remember exactly what he says, but it's something like maybe I'm the shepherd and you're the evil, or maybe like I'm the shepherd and the world is the evil, or he's like maybe I'm the evil of the world, but I'm trying really hard to be the shepherd. So it's like this really interesting, like his arc is probably the most non-linear part of the movie.
Yeah.
And the most interesting.
I think there's something to be said about the kind of the dichotomy between Samuel L. Jackson's character and John Travolta's character, and how Samuel L. Jackson decides he's going to change his ways. He's going to become a better person. He's going to, I mean, from my memory, he commits to sort of ending his life of crime. Whereas John Travolta is like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. And he ends up getting gunned down by Bruce Willis's character.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah, that's what happens. Is basically Samuel Jackson is like, I'm just going to wander the earth and help people and go on adventures. And John Travolta's like, so you're going to be a bum. Like, there's a word for people like that. It's called a bum. And then because Samuel Jackson isn't there, isn't partners anymore with John Travolta, when John Travolta goes over to Bruce Willis's house and goes to take a dump, no one is there to watch the front door when Bruce Willis comes home. And so that's why but also John Travolta's kind of a dunce the whole movie. That's kind of his character. He's like this kind of like,
yeah, that's true.
He's like an everyday man. He's like constantly making like these small mistakes, but he's not like a straight up idiot about it. He's just kind of like, he even gives like the wolf some back talk. The wolf like doesn't say please one time, and John Travolta's like, you could have said please. And it's like this whole, like, he's kind of a duncy guy. So like he goes to take a dump and he leaves his gun on the kitchen counter. And so Bruce Willis like picks up the gun and just murders him with it. So but I will say, and Natalie said the same thing, the Bruce Willis storyline is like pretty like I wouldn't say unneeded because it serves a purpose, but it's the most random part of the movie, especially towards the end of the film where like they end up in the pawn shop basement and like the whole like gimp scene happens, and it's like it doesn't relate to anything else in the movie, and there's really no payoff for it. It's just there to wrap up Bruce Willis's storyline, and it's a cool scene. Like it's very interesting and memorable, but it really serves no thematic purpose.
I mean, it's interesting that you'd say that because my read of the movie is that Bruce Willis is the main protagonist. He's the good guy of the movie.
But he doesn't show up until, I mean, he has like one scene in the middle of the movie, and then like the third act is like where he really shines. So kind of, I mean, the movie ends with him winning, you know what I mean? But he's not in a lot of the movie.
I mean, yeah, if it was told in a more traditional fashion, Bruce Willis would be the main character. He'd be there from the beginning to end, and it would be a story of him escaping from this violent gang that, fixed this boxing match that he then, went against the deal. And it's the story of him escaping them. And, he doesn't really do, as far as I can think, he doesn't really do anything wrong in the movie. He's like a little verbally abusive to his girlfriend.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, but even he gets really pissed when she forgets the watch, but then he even immediately, and again, this is this goes to show that Tarantino really knows what he's doing when he's writing, because that's a great scene is where they're about to leave, they're getting ready to flee the town because they know that Marcellus Wallace is going to try to kill him, and they don't have the watch, and it's the whole, Bruce Willis has to go back to his apartment to get this watch that means so much to him. And when he realizes that his girlfriend didn't pack the watch, he starts throwing things around the room and he's super pissed off. But then immediately afterward, he like apologizes. He like sits down, he's like, it's not your fault, I should have told you how important the watch was to me and I didn't express that properly to you. Like he gets like super apologetic and articulate.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting scene.
Yeah, I mean, but I still think, just real quick, getting back to my point, I still think that, in a traditional sense, Bruce Willis would be the main protagonist, and then Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta, they're the villains. Marcellus Wallace ends up on good terms with him, but he's kind of the big boss bad guy. Tarantino kind of shifts the what would be the traditional story, spends a lot more time characterizing the bad guys, and instead of Bruce Willis ending up killing Marcellus Wallace or something, it's something totally way different happens. And I think that's kind of what Tarantino's style is. It's kind of putting a twist on traditional stories in a way that's uniquely Tarantino, that no other writer or director really does.
Yeah, and like you said, he takes a traditional storyline and he approaches it from a different angle, right? That like we said with Reservoir Dogs, he's taking a traditional story about a heist and he's approaching it from a very different angle, where he's focusing on this one tiny little aspect of it and twisting the narrative in a way you haven't seen. In Pulp Fiction, Bruce Willis's storyline, if you look at it beat for beat, most closely resembles a traditional the train, dude, I love it.
Oh yeah.
I was gonna say, Bruce Willis's storyline most closely resembles a traditional protagonist's storyline, right? But the movie is structured in a way where John Travolta's character structurally is the protagonist of the film. He has the most screen time. He interacts with the most variety of characters. He starts the film with Samuel Jackson, then he has a giant chunk of the film with Uma Thurman, and then he has a big chunk at the end of the film again with Samuel Jackson. Like structurally, the protagonist of the film is Samuel Jackson. But from a traditional standpoint, if you look at a story beat for beat, his story doesn't really have like an arc really at all.
Yeah, his character doesn't develop in any way that I can think of.
And yet he has the most screen time and he is interesting to watch throughout. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you knew this, but this role for him was a huge renaissance in his career. Like, he had Grease, and then he had a couple of movies here and there since then. But, when they cast John Travolta in this movie, it was seen as a controversial move because people didn't really think he could pull off a strong film like this. And he killed it, obviously. Everyone in this movie, I mean, I don't know if it's just the writing or the directing. I don't know what it is, but Tarantino's able to take these like actors that are great actors, don't get me wrong, but he's able to like get like A+ performances out of everyone in his films. So
as you said, like before this, what people knew John Travolta for was basically Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a completely, goes without saying, completely absurd choice, but in hindsight, it was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an interesting point that you made that, so traditionally, Bruce Willis would have been the protagonist. Structurally, as you said, John Travolta was kind of the protagonist because he had the most screen time. But then I would argue thematically, to add sort of a third axiom to this,
Samuel Jackson.
I would say thematically, Samuel L. Jackson is the main character, right?
Yeah.
He goes through the biggest character arc,
Yeah.
and he kind of has a spiritual awakening, kind of an epiphany within him
Yeah.
that fundamentally changes his character.
So
And
basically,
so
what
it's
Tarantino
kind of
did.
interesting how.
Basically, what Tarantino did is he sat down and he looked at a story about these two people, about two people that want out of the life of crime, but for different reasons. You've got Bruce Willis that wants to escape crime because he wants to get his money, he wants to get out, he wants to never think about crime again. And then you've got this character, Samuel Jackson, that wants to get out of crime because he's had a spiritual reawakening. He thinks that he's made for a better purpose. And then Tarantino says, well, what's the character that connects these two people? The middle guy. Who is the middle guy? And let's make the movie mostly focus on this middle guy and tell the other character stories through him, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it really is, and it makes me want to watch Pulp Fiction again. I think that's so cool.
Now I will say, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it tells the story of what normally would be the least interesting guy. He would be the henchman, in a typical crime movie, But then it tells the story of him, and then the people who could have been the protagonists kind of take a back seat in some ways.
Yeah.
So that's Tarantino for you.
Now I will say, and then we got to wrap this up so we can keep it moving. Natalie and I were pretty turned off by Tarantino's scene in this movie.
Oh.
I
knew we needed to talk about this one.
We need to talk about it. Tarantino. Okay, no. I don't necessarily think that inherently it's wrong to have white people drop the N-word in a movie. If you do it right and it serves a thematic purpose, if you do it in a way that is clearly either racist or a sign of the times, you know what I mean, in a way where it's like self-aware, I don't think inherently there's a problem with it. Where we run, especially if it's written in like a funny way, because on paper that scene is very funny, and the actual lines that are said, as vulgar as they are, they're pretty funny. But you run into problems when you are writing and directing the scene that you are also starring in, and you're allowing yourself to drop the N-word like a billion times. I think it's just, it's very uncomfortable to watch. And on rewatch, like Natalie and I were sitting there like kind of like sucking our teeth, like, I don't know about this, because he just keeps saying it. Oh, like he says it a lot. And if Tarantino just cast some guy in that scene, we wouldn't have thought twice about it. But the fact that he cast himself in the scene where the white guy like drops the N-word more than like any other time in the movie, it's just like, why?
It is very strange. I mean,
and
I will say there's a lot of shock.
Yeah, I mean, it's done in a shock. It's like shock comedy, but it's like the character. It's just, why would you cast yourself to be the guy that's like racistly throwing out the N-word a billion times? Like, why do you have to be that guy?
It's very strange, and it makes me, you don't even have to wonder. It's all but guaranteed at this point. Tarantino's got some ulterior motives when he's making pretty much every movie he makes, right?
Like, did his ulterior just make motives the whole movie so that he could drop the N-word in front of Samuel L. Jackson?
Right. He wants to say the N-word, and he wants to see women's feet. He wants to see women's bare feet.
Like,
those are his
Like
Modus
traditionally,
operandi.
like
No,
traditionally, if a rich white guy wanted to say the N-word, they would just say it in front of their black friends. But Tarantino has to approach the script from a unique perspective, where instead he's gonna write an Oscar-winning movie built around the idea of him being able to drop the N-word in the middle of it. All right, we had a little bit of a weird cut there, but I think we get the idea. Pulp Fiction,
yeah.
great movie, questionable choice to the role that he cast himself in. Um,
Yep.
I'm gonna say okay. So moving on, he did he did the screenplay for a movie called Four Rooms. Never heard of it.
Never
He
heard of it either.
he did the screenplay for and starred in From Dusk Till Dawn, which I have not seen. It sounds like you have a lot to say about it, but I have not seen
It's
it myself.
one of my favorite Tarantino related movies.
Really?
Um, I wouldn't say it's my favorite. It's close though. It's like top 2 or top 3.
Wow.
Um, it's an incredible movie to show to someone who knows nothing about it.
Okay.
Which is
That
why
might be
I'm
me.
gonna avoid. Wait, what?
That might be me.
Yeah, I'm gonna avoid saying too much, but man, oh man, starts off like a normal Tarantino movie. It feels like Tarantino directed the first half or 2/3 of the movie. Crime drama, two guys in black suits, um, running from the law. They find a family in an RV because they're trying to cross the border into Mexico. Because once they get there, they're home free. They're officially escaped from the law at that point. So they find a family, go on a vacation to Mexico in an RV, go in there, hold them at gunpoint, and villains are sympathetic. They're our main characters, right? The kind of the family there who are just innocent victims, they're of course also sympathetic. So we kind of feel for both of them. We want them to get along. They end up going to a biker bar, I think just south of the border in Mexico. They end up going to a bar called the Titty Twister,
Of
and
course.
I think that's where I have to stop talking
Okay,
because
it takes a turn there.
it takes a turn. It's
Okay.
incredible.
We should watch it sometime.
Incredible.
We should watch it sometime.
We absolutely should. We absolutely should. There's a series based on it. Also called From Dusk Till Dawn,
Like a
which
TV
I think
show.
is a really good. Yeah, I think it's really good. It's
Okay.
also worth watching. The first season of that show is just the movie, but it's also really good. I would highly recommend the movie and the show. So
Okay.
that's all I'm gonna say.
I'm surprised. I did not know that it was like a particularly good film. I've just
It's
never
so
seen it.
fun.
But
So
I
fun.
am interested in watching it, and I thank you for not saying too much because it sounds like one that I would like to just experience. So I appreciate that.
You do not look up anything about it, and definitely don't if you go to it on like a streaming service like Netflix or whatever, don't even read the description.
Okay.
Because last time it was on Netflix, the description literally just spoils what happens.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Okay. Um, the
Watch it.
next movie is one. So there's only two movies directed by Tarantino that I have not seen. This next one is one of them. It came out in 1997. It was written and directed by Tarantino. It's called Jackie Brown. I
I
have
have
not
not
seen.
seen it.
I have not seen
Oh,
Jackie Brown.
okay. I almost watched it today to prepare,
Yeah.
and I was like, either Jiro's is seeing it or not.
Yeah, no,
You know?
I haven't seen it. I would like to see it. I apparently
Yeah,
it's
me
kind
too.
of like I hear that it kind of like pays homage to like how do you say that word? Blaxploitation films.
Blaxploitation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear he like watched a bunch of those and basically made Jackie Brown. Apparently it's pretty good. I've just never seen it. So unfortunately I can't really speak too much on it. But I think it's got like good reviews and stuff, and it made a fuckload of money in the box office. So, um,
Yeah, I would love to see it. I don't know
Samuel
why I've
Jackson's
never
in
seen
it.
it. Just kind of an under.
Michael Keaton's in it.
Wow, I didn't know that part.
Robert De Niro's in it.
What?
Uh, and then of course like a bunch of famous black actors. Chris Tucker.
Just kind of flies below the radar in terms of Tarantino movies. So
Yeah,
I don't know. I
maybe
have to watch it.
maybe for racist reasons, but um,
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I mean, it best supporting actor Oscar nomination, but no win. Um, but yeah, it definitely feels like it's one of like the lesser known Tarantino films or lesser talked
Right.
about. You know what I mean? Like, and
Right.
the other one that I haven't seen, which is coming up later on in 2007, I also just never hear about. So I'm not sure. But the last one that we can talk about, and I think it's apt before we cut this episode off, and we'll have to do a follow up episode. 2003, written and directed by Tarantino, Kill Bill Volume 1. In my opinion, like top tier Tarantino. And this it's like the perfect example of there's two different types of movies that you can make about, well, there's more than two, but the two best ways to make a movie about a woman is, number one, you make a movie like Lady Bird, where you make a movie
Mm.
about a woman that is integral to the female experience, or you make a movie that like could have starred a dude but instead it stars a woman, and that's what Kill Bill is, where Kill Bill, like, she's not, the protagonist isn't necessarily like, she's not really feminine, like there are feminine aspects to her character, but it's really just a baller action movie starring a woman.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. I've only seen the two Kill Bill movies once each, and it's been at least I want to say 3 years now. And I liked them. I still remember them pretty well.
Yeah.
Um, I remember one being more like a kung fu movie, and the other being more like a Western movie. Am I misremembering that, or is that correct?
um I don't
That's the way
they
I
kind
remember
of
it.
blend for me as well, because the second one is where she actually does the kung fu training, but
Yeah, that's
both
true.
movies heavily, I mean, both movies kind of blend this, and that's what makes them so good, is that they blend Western, a typical Western revenge story, with
Right.
like kung fu samurai action, and they kind of take those two styles and blend them together. And it's, again, everything that we've talked about with Tarantino so far, except he basically decided to make an action movie and turn the violence up to 11. Like, there's
Yeah.
blood splurting everywhere in like unrealistic ways. Like, if you're talking about appealing to the male fantasy, this is the movie that appeals to like the violent aspect of the
Yeah.
male fantasy. You know what I mean? It's like every baller violent thing you could imagine that like a dude would want to see in a movie, you're going to find it in Kill
Yep.
Bill.
Yep. It's another major theme to Tarantino movies is the ultra violence, and
Yeah.
this is it. Like it's I mean, the way the story is kind of unfolded, if I remember correctly, you don't really know right away why she hates Bill. Am
Correct.
yeah, you don't really know right away, and then they kind of reveal it throughout the movie. Um, Lots of cool. Yeah, they blend together. Like I'm trying to remember the difference between the first and the second one.
They definitely
Um,
blend, and on purpose. I mean, it is one
yeah, I
story.
mean they
I
are.
mean, even in
Yeah,
even in Tarantino's eyes, he counts them as one film. And
yeah,
I'm sure if he were to release it today, he probably would just release it as a 5 hour film, because that's who Tarantino is now. Um,
right.
but yeah, you're correct. The movie kind of just drops you into the storyline of this girl, this woman that's just killing. She has a kill list, literally, and you don't really know why. And throughout the film, you learn pieces of who Bill is and what her story is. And um, I haven't seen it in a long time either, so even I couldn't tell you specific like I remember a lot of the more broad plot points, but I remember it being amazing, and it's got phenomenal acting, it's got phenomenal writing, and the direction in it is really, I mean, this is one of those films where, I mean, Pulp Fiction was directed incredibly as well. It looks great. There are shots that are just blow your mind. Like, how did he even think to do that? Like, but
Yeah.
this movie is like, he takes those elements of like a western film or a Japanese film with the hard cuts, and there's even like an anime scene in it. Like,
Yeah, that's
the
right.
visuals are really spectacular. The color contrast, like, it is an action movie to its core, and in a much more traditional sense than a lot of his other movies are. But that being said, it's still like, it's a Tarantino movie at its heart, which means it has great writing, it has great dialogue, and the characters are actually interesting. They're not these one-dimensional. I mean, the protagonist doesn't even have a name until the last like 10 minutes of the second film, and you still
Right.
like you still like want to follow this character. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it's full of those little moments, right, that just build character.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to say about the Kill Bill movies is I feel like they should have been one movie, you know? Like I feel like there's a lot that could have been cut out, and I feel like the second one is definitely weaker than the first one.
I don't remember.
I just remember the second one not having a lot of great fight scenes. The first one absolutely does, where there's a huge confrontation with the main, or well, not the main, the secondary villain. It's like the, I guess, the main henchman of Bill. Her name was Go-Go. I'm
The chick
googling
with
it
the
right
eye
now.
patch.
Yeah, I think so. Or no, I don't know.
She's one of the big. There's a whole list of them, right? There's a whole list. I mean, she has like a whole list of people to kill before she gets to Bill. And I
Right.
do agree. Again, I don't. It's been a long time since I've seen both of them, and they sort of blend together in my mind for most
Yeah.
people. But I do think you're right in that the first film is much more focused on like a ton of action scenes and a ton of violence. And then the first movie ends and she's like halfway through her list, or maybe a little bit more than halfway through her list. And it's like, you basically just needed the third act. You know what I mean? Where it's like, we need to wrap up the story of the film, of like killing, like confronting Bill and everything. And you're probably right. He probably could have cut a bunch of shit and turned it into like a 3-hour movie. But I mean, he just wasn't that guy. He wasn't. Maybe he was that guy, but audiences weren't ready for it. I mean, back in 2003, we didn't have the same media landscape where people would sit down and binge 5 hours of TV. And it really wasn't. I mean, we were getting there. It was the beginning of that, but it wasn't until much later on and much more recently that movie creators understood there was an audience for people that wanted to sit down and watch a 3-hour movie, if not more. And so I think he just realized, like, this is gonna, like, I have too much I mean, it's Tarantino. He doesn't want to cut anything from his movies. You think that guy's gonna cut a single scene? Like, any scene that he cuts probably tears him up inside. You know what I mean? So
Right.
I mean, you're right. Someone else, some other company would have turned this into one movie that was like 2.5 hours long, and we wouldn't have seen half of what was in these two films.
Yeah, I mean, Tarantino is the guy who put the conversation about the Royale with cheese
Right.
in one of his
Yeah. You know
movies.
what I mean?
He doesn't want to cut anything,
Yeah.
anything at all. Like,
Because
um,
you get the feeling that he's a little narcissistic. That's what makes a good artist,
yeah,
is he thinks that everything he makes is 10 out of 10, and if you disagree, you just don't understand it. You know what I mean?
right,
He's that type of movie creator, which is why later on in 2015 and 2019, we got The Hateful Eight and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which are like
right.
8-hour movies. You know what I mean? Where it's like, that's the epitome of like Tarantino knows there's an audience for long films. And so not only is The Hateful Eight really long, but there's a Netflix version that's even longer. That's like 5 or 6 hours long. So
Right.
uh, I just think he was a little before his time in terms of how long the story was that he wanted to tell. So he split it into two movies. But in interviews now, when you ask him about it, he counts it as one movie. So
Yeah.
whatever. And I think we can end our podcast there. If we want to talk a little bit more about part two in the next episode, we can do so. And then we're coming up on like probably our favorite Tarantino films in the next episode.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
I would
absolutely.
say after this he starts putting out like the real Kino 10 out of 10s. So I'm very interested for that episode. But of the films we discussed today, which one is your favorite?
Let's see. We talked about Reservoir Dogs. We talked about the Kill Bill movies.
Pulp
What
Fiction,
else do we?
Dusk Till Dawn.
Fiction. You know what? I'm gonna say out of the movies we discussed today, I would say From Dusk Till Dawn is my favorite.
Really, dude? We barely even talked about
Absolutely.
it. Oh my
Absolutely.
gosh. Okay.
I mean, yeah,
Well,
you need to see it, man. Like, it's it's a ride. Like,
it's a ride.
I've watched it more times than any other movie we've talked about here.
Okay. Okay.
Like, it's so fun. It's just so fun to watch.
Okay. For me,
You just gotta see it.
for me personally, my favorite of the ones we've talked about today is probably Reservoir Dogs. Um, it's really close with Pulp Fiction. I like them for very different reasons. Pulp Fiction is a much more accessible movie. Reservoir Dogs is it's going to be harder for some people to watch because it is just dudes talking for like 2.5 hours or whatever. But um, awesome movie. I can't believe it's his first
Yeah.
one. So um, with that being said, thanks for joining me. Hopefully within the next week or so, we can record the next episode, and we'll take it from there.
All right.
Thanks, Jimbo.
Thanks, Giro. See you later.
See you, man. Peace. Well, that is it for today's episode of Movies with Giros. I appreciate you guys listening, watching as always. Come on back for next episode if you want to hear part two. Like I said in the podcast, I think the second half of Tarantino's filmography is a little bit more interesting and has some of my favorite films in it. So I'm really excited to talk about those films. Again, follow me on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can find me by just typing in with GROSE with Giros. And yeah, I hope you guys keep on coming back. Thanks for listening. See you later. Peace.